we we feel like the funding recipient should be obligated to meet a certain uptime requirement or uptime standard specified, in that contract. And in Flow's view, we think at least right now with the market, 97% uptime calculated across a 12-month period is the right uptime metrics to start with. And I think the question we get a lot is, well, how did you decide 97%? It's not an exact science, to be totally frank with you. It really kind of comes from two perspectives. One, how do over here we provide flexibility to the site host and to the charging vendor to fix the station when it's broken? But then how do we balance that against a high level of service to drivers, knowing that mainstream consumers are not going to have patience for broken chargers? How do we guarantee a high level of service? And so when you look at the table here and we break it down into, well, what does that translate to across a year? You're really talking about less than 1 day of downtime per month at 97%. We thought that was pretty good. And we also thought, like I said, this is a representation of where the market is now. We should be moving closer and closer to 100% over time. And really, we're not reinventing the wheel here. We're not out in left field with this number. These are examples of uptime requirements from multiple jurisdictions. You've got utilities on here, we've got state agencies, we even have the federal government through the Federal Highway Administration. Some of you may know they're requiring a greater than 97% uptime requirement. And so you can see across the board here that some of these uptime requirements are even higher than what Flow is positing. So we feel like we're in good keeping here with what a lot of precedent has been set across the country in multiple venues. And so Michigan has an opportunity to be doing the same with its own EV charging investments. When it comes to actually hitting this target, though, when you set the target with an uptime requirement, you actually have to back it up with data and with measuring toward the target. Otherwise, you have no idea whether you've actually been meeting this uptime obligation. So Flow has spent a lot of time thinking about, well, you need a formula and what goes into the formula if you're actually going to measure compliance with the standard. So really, this is kind of a breakdown of how we think about our formula. Outage time, just kind of stating the obvious, it's just the length of time the charger is out or offline. Excluded time, and I'm going to get into this more in a second, it's really the amount of time we exclude from the overall uptime calculation. We think there are certain situations that bring a charger offline that should be exempted from the calculation. And then in-service time really is just the inverse of excluded time. So it's just, of outage time, it's just the inverse. So when we really break it down, excluded time really is a key underpinning of how you actually measure compliance, because we think, like I said, there should be issues excluded. And this really boils down to what is the charging company or the charging vendor, what can they control versus what they cannot control. And so the things that we cannot control that might bring a charger offline really are upstream infrastructure failures upstream from the charger. And what we're really talking about here is the grid, cellular, and internet. And so if there are other people or other entities who manage those things, so if those things fail for whatever reason, Flow as the charging provider really has no way to bring those things back online. And for example, out in California, when we do public safety power shutoffs in order to prevent wildfires, I'm sorry, but no one's going to turn the grid back on in the face of a potential wildfire just to keep a charger up and running. We don't think that should, ding our reliability score, if you will. Another category that we think deserves an exemption is really these instances of force majeure. These are really kind of unexpected, unforeseen, catastrophic events that we could not have prepared for in any way. And so when those are happening, if they do, wipe out the infrastructure, they're probably wiping out multiple segments of infrastructure. We're not special or alone in those impacts, and that should be accounted for. And the next one I wanted to talk about is vandalism and abuse. And this is really a special consideration that we think deserves kind of some unique consideration behind it, which is if there is vandalism occurring and you do not give some kind of special allowance or exemption for vandalism, you could be creating a perverse incentive for folks to be deploying chargers, or let's just say avoiding areas of higher rates of vandalism. And so we think that creates issues around the equitable deployment of infrastructure. We believe chargers need to be evenly accessible across a geography or across a territory. And we certainly don't want to avoid certain areas and then creating skewed access to charging stations. And we have seen that vandalism can be a real issue, especially in the instance of cut cables. This is something we've experienced in a few different jurisdictions, and it does take a lot of time to replace those cables and to get the charger back up and running. And so therefore would want to give it some kind of special consideration. So when you try to operationalize this formula and calculating uptime, here's the actual formula we created. There's really not too many moving parts to it, but OT stands for outage time, ET stands for excluded time. I won't bore you guys with too many details on how you actually implement it, but this is what it would look like in action. And you just, you plug in the numbers based on the chargers you are calculating for in the given time period that you're calculating for. The thing is, though, there's additional elements in the reporting framework or the data framework that we think should be attached to any type of uptime requirements or reliability requirements. So there's some other features that we think are worth covering. So one, these uptime requirements we think should be attached per individual charger. And part of the reason why it should be per charger as opposed to a site or opposed to an entire network is that if you allow site level aggregation, you might have higher performing chargers covering low performing chargers. And right now at this state in the market with our anemic infrastructure, every charger being highly reliable counts. It's very meaningful from the driver standpoint. As we have higher levels of redundancy and more infrastructure built out, maybe that can change over time and should change over time. Or if you're building a site of 20, 40 chargers, 60 chargers, perhaps like the Tesla model, there's some merit to probably doing a greater level of aggregation, but we just don't think we're there yet. We believe all data reporting, all reliability reporting should match whatever's the length of time for the reliability standard. We like to think of it as a minimum of 5 years because that's well into the useful life of the charger. So therefore data reporting should be for the length of that period as well to measure compliance with the standard. And then really when we calculate uptime, you're doing annual reporting and you're calculating uptime across a 12-month period. We like 12 months because we feel like that gives a more averaged, consistent understanding of a charger's performance. Technically, you can calculate reliability across 1 month, 3 months, 6 months, whatever number you want, but sometimes you might have events, sudden unexpected events, and it can skew the data. So we like 12 months for that more averaged understanding. And then even though we have these list of things that we think should be exclusions, we still think it's meaningful and worthwhile to require reporting of that excluded time so that you can still see the true reliability of the charger and you can see to what extent these excluded events are impacting the reliability of that charger. We just think it's important to kind of make that separate and to make sure you're not, dinging the charging provider for those events. So that's it in a nutshell. Tried to move quickly in the interest of time and so that we can have discussion. There's certainly more nuances to think about, but I think these kind of cover all the key pieces. So I'm happy to turn it over to you, Jane, to kick off the discussion, and happy to take questions from folks and dig into this. And should I stop sharing my screen, Jane? And
yeah, if you want to pull your slides down, Cory, thank you so much. It's a really interesting topic, and I appreciate you kicking us off with kind of a proposal. I'm going to turn it over to Emily Kelly from ChargePoint now to hear her feedback, additional questions, and her perspective on this topic as well.
Great, thank you, Jane, and thank you, Cory. That was great, and happy to be here with you all. I'll do a quick intro. My name is Emily Kelly. I'm the Public Policy Manager at ChargePoint for the Northeast and then some of the Midwest states. So I work specifically on our state policy efforts. And just a quick background about ChargePoint. We, truly believe the future is electric. We started in 2007, and like Flow, our focus is EV charging. We design and deploy software and hardware solutions really for all the places that EV drivers go and all the types of vehicles that they drive. We currently have over 175,000 ports globally, and an additional 300,000 ports are available through our roaming agreements with other companies. So yeah, this is a great topic, and one that we've been having, a lot of internal discussions about at ChargePoint and also with Flow and a lot of the other providers. Certainly reliability and uptime are super important to us as a company, and obviously for the entire industry. We want to strive to create the best driver experience for all those who choose to go electric. And as Cory said in the beginning, reliable chargers are going to drive adoption. I think we very much largely align with a lot of the points that Cory made on this overall framework and in determining these standards around this issue. Couple things I just want to point out is that at ChargePoint, we really want to make sure we're using an evidence-based approach to determine what the appropriate definitions are for both reliability and uptime. And we would love to see a consistent definition developed for those two terms that can be used, across the states here in North America, and certainly across the provinces in Canada as well. We think, figuring out one definition and then hopefully incorporating that throughout the country will really help, with this issue for the site hosts that, are going to be responsible for doing the reporting and all of that. A patchwork of definitions or different laws in the states regarding this issue will be tough, and I think create confusion across jurisdictions. So I think that definition that gets created for both those terms is really important. And our business model primarily allows for third parties to own and operate stations. So we typically at ChargePoint are not the ones owning and operating. It's whomever we sell the station to. So whether it's a university or a hospital or a municipality or a convenience station, they become the site hosts of that station. So it's, I think, a priority of ours internally to make sure that those site hosts are equipped and empowered with the tools to report out on uptime easily and accurately when it comes time to do so. And I know we're having lots of conversations about that internally, how to make that seamless for them if and when they do have to report out on this data. So we're thinking about that as well. And as Cory mentioned, annual reporting makes a lot of sense to us too. We would just like to see that happen at the same time each year, so maybe on January 1st, that's when the reporting happens. Every 12 months for the ground of stations that are installed, and not create like a patchwork of when reports have to be given. So it's just one example of a way that we'd like to make it as easy as possible for our site hosts. But other than that, yeah, I mean, again, Cory, thank you. That was a great conversation. And yeah, I'd love to open it up to questions and more thoughts from the group.
Thank you so much, Emily. That was really helpful in adding to our conversation here. One question that I have, and then folks be ready to chime in or put your questions in the chat. You know, given that we have all of these charging station or this money for charging stations coming from the federal government, I don't think that information about reliability or uptime requirements has been announced for the NEVI program. And Cory, or anyone on the call, feel free to answer this, Emily, you as well. How are we thinking that funding will be impacted by this question? I guess I'll leave it at that. Kind of forward looking, where do we go from here?
Well, I'm happy to jump in with the first step. So the Federal Highway Administration has set a greater than 97% reliability requirement at the individual station level, I think is how they've termed it. And what we are missing, though, and we might see, or I think we're likely to see more detail on this May 13th, is kind of a second set of guidance that's going to come out from them, and it'll further spell out certain details to a whole host of things related to that funding. I have some sneaking suspicions they will have some pieces to measure compliance with the 97% requirement. We just don't know the full details yet. So depending on what they come out with, Michigan has an opportunity to, let's say, up the ante, if you will. So anything coming out from the federal government really is meant to be a set of minimum standards, is the term actually specified in the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. So what MDOT can do with its 110 million is they can kind of plus up the standards or add even more to it. So if there's some detail missing, let's say, to how to measure compliance with this, MDOT could conceivably always add more to it. That being said, this is partly to a point Emily was making, is that we do want consistency, right, across the states. So hopefully what MDOT does is going to be consistent with other states. So that way we can kind of have one unified system.
Thanks, Cory. Emily, did you want to add anything on that?
No, I mean, I think Cory's spot on. I think, again, having that one consistent, definition is very helpful across jurisdictions. And we're certainly looking forward to that guidance coming out on the 13th.
Yeah, great.